So yeah, I started at UNM in 2010 and was studying journalism and graduated in 2014. I started working at the Journal in, I think it was 2013, while I was still in school, and then they offered me a full-time job once I was out. But that was just like, a year or two ago. So not too far from where you guys are, and it's totally doable. People say, it's so hard to get a job in the media industry, but they're out there, and they certainly want young people. They want people who have the skills that our generation just has from growing up with the internet and all that. So yeah, I'm a crime reporter. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I wanted to first start with talking about the way newspapers work, in case you guys haven't really seen a newsroom yet or been to a newsroom. There's basically, it's broken down by topic. So reporters are assigned areas of focus, and the idea is that you become kind of an expert in that area. So you're not always bouncing around to different beats and different topics. You get knowledge around a certain topic. So examples of beats are up there. Public education, we have a reporter who covers K through 12 education in the state. We have a courts reporter. They are in charge of covering all the trials. The courts are kind of what comes after crime. So I do crime, and then the courts reporter will take it over once it goes into the trial phase. Politics is a big one. That's something newspapers have always traditionally put a lot of resources into. Environmental issues, and then city government too is like city hall issues that affect Albuquerque. Well, I already kind of covered this, but I began at the Journal in 2013, and they started me off with crime. That wasn't something I ever thought that I was going to do. I thought I was going to do some cool National Geographic job, or something involving the environment, or something more aligned to those interests. But the way that most newspapers work is they start you with crime because, I think because it's not very easy. You have to learn a lot really quickly. You're basically, every other beat that I just mentioned, you'll run into crime. In politics, politicians commit crimes all the time. It's not, that's not unheard of. Even stuff with the environment, there's crime involved in that. Courts obviously has a direct link to crime. So it's kind of the foundation of journalism. Also because it relies on public records a lot, which is key to journalism. When people don't want to tell you things, which it happens all the time, you have to find public records to tell you what's going on. So it'll teach you the fundamentals pretty quick. So these are some of the topics I cover. Number one is murders, because those are the most common. There's one a week at least here. And then officer-involved shootings. There used to be a ton of those. As you guys might remember, the police department has since been undergoing a lot of reform, so we're not seeing as many of those anymore. Officers shot by suspects, which has happened 3 times last year, which is surprising. So that's suddenly, I never covered those before last year. I also cover breaking news events, fires and flooding in the city and any other sort of natural disasters. Drunk driving crashes and riots. Those don't happen too often, but they're fun when they do. So here's the main points when you're writing a crime story. The number one thing is that you have to attribute everything. You as a reporter don't know independently that a shooting occurred. You're being told that by the police. So you have to say that. You have to say the police said a shooting happened, or someone was killed on this block, according to the police. You can get in a lot of trouble if you don't do that because, there's libel laws and, a lot of rules governing proper attribution to sources. Definitely use multiple sources. It's pretty easy when you're covering crime to want to rely just on what the police tell you. They're kind of the authority. They're there on scene. They're going to tell you what happened. But just like everyone else, police have a certain point of view. So while, of course, your story is going to rely a lot on what they say, you also need to make sure you're getting quotes from witnesses at the scene who might have seen it, even if it contradicts, especially if it contradicts what the police have said. As well as you always want to reach out to the family of victims involved in the crimes. That's usually the most poignant way to get a story, because those are the people who are really affected by it. The police, they do this every day. It's not changing their lives to have a murder down the street, but whoever's family member that is, that's probably the worst moment in their life. So if possible, you want to talk to those people if they're willing to discuss it with you. Pay attention to details. When you're at a crime scene, there's a lot you can learn just from observation. You'll see where the police are going. You'll see maybe like bullet casings on the street, or there's a lot you can gather from that. And then, the last point is that the stories are about the human beings affected by crime. It's not really about the police, unless the police officer is a victim of a crime. It's about the people who are affected by that, as well as the community response. Okay, so here's an example. So this is what a beginner crime story might look like. A parking enforcement officer found a man dead in his car around noon on Christmas Eve near Lincoln Road Mall in Miami. That's the first sentence. It's a pretty standard lead. If you guys have learned about like inverted pyramid, that's like a very basic inverted pyramid. Most important thing, man dead, with the location and time and all that. But here's what would happen if you jazzed it up a little bit. It was high noon during the Christmas rush in a city parking lot outside a Miami Beach department store near bustling Lincoln Road Mall. A shiny lime green Coupe de Ville sat at a meter, its wheels turned sharply. The red flag signaled violation. The driver's time had run out. The meter maid had written a parking ticket. She leaned over to place it on the windshield and saw the man inside. A parking ticket would not irritate this driver. Nothing would. She called police. So that's just like totally different and way better, I think. So that was written by a Pulitzer-winning crime reporter from the Miami Herald, Edna Buchanan, who's kind of a legend among crime reporters. But the point of this is that she went out to the scene and got all of this detail that I can guarantee you didn't come from the police. She was there. She saw how it was parked. She saw the ticket, all that kind of thing, and wrote this, which is a completely different story from the one before. So how do you get from there to here? We're going to talk about how you gather information. The main ways I find stories are by listening to the police scanner. We have a big scanner at the Journal. We also have a portable one that you can just take with you as you're driving around. A lot of the time, the police just let us know. They're supposed to be providing the public information, and we as the Journal are one of the main ways that we reach a lot of people. So they disseminate info through us. Court records, every morning I go downtown and read through criminal complaints, which is a stack of the day's felonies from the day before. So police will make probably like 30 felony arrests in a day, and I'll read through all of them and see what's interesting and choose ones out. And then another way is often another news outlet will have an interesting story and we'll have to follow it, which is the least fun way, but sometimes it happens. So yeah, I was going to talk about the scanner a little more. So this is the police scanner. I'll turn it up a little so you can hear. It's basically scanning all area commands of the city. So the police department is structured by area. There's officers patrolling different parts, and their dispatches will come through over this, telling you what area they are in. And so they talk in 10 codes. So you kind of need to learn them if you're going to be listening to the scanner a lot. The main ones are 10-7, which they say a lot just meaning out of service, but it can also mean that someone's dead. 27-1, homicide. 27-8 is a shooting. You hear that a lot. 27-9 is a stabbing. So those are kind of ones we look out for, obviously, because we're looking for mostly violent crime. And then other codes you're going to hear a lot, but that we don't really cover is 1040. That's mental health issues, which you hear all the time. We have a lot of mental health issues in this city. 1018 is someone who's drunk, also very common. The 20 is a location. You hear that all the time. They're like, I'm going to your 20, or give me a call at your 20, or what's your 20? And then 1030 is a child. So the important thing to remember about the scanner is that it's a way to find out about stories, but it's not something you can ever use to report from. This is live police dispatches, and that means that it's happening really quickly. This hasn't been verified by anyone. They respond to shooting calls all the time that aren't shootings. So to go out and report off of that would be a really big mistake. And this is proven time and time again. I think it was the Boston Marathon bombings where some of the media outlets started reporting stuff off of the scanner, and it did not have good results. In those situations, stuff is moving way too quickly. It's just not a verified source of information. But it's great for finding out what's happening and going there to the scene. So I'll just pass this around if you guys want to mess around with it. You can. So every morning I go down to Metropolitan Court. That's the main city court. If you've ever had a traffic ticket, you've probably gone there. It's on 4th and Lomas. So I go down there. That's where all felony cases originate. And basically every morning there's a stack of documents waiting for you. And like I mentioned earlier, you just read through each document, find what's interesting, and make copies, which will then potentially turn into stories. So for example, this morning I went down before this and pulled some complaints, which I can also pass around. This one was a guy arrested he was pulled over by state police for following too close, and it turned out he had 84 pounds of marijuana in his car. So, yeah. So we'll probably write that up later. Yeah, it's a lot. So then so last night we got a call that there was a stabbing over at Central in San Mateo. It was pretty late, it was like 11 p.m. So we had a reporter who wrote that up. So this morning there was a complaint on that. Someone charged with the stabbing, they found the knife in a dumpster nearby. The guy so far has survived. This is a complaint. If you guys have been following the news recently, there was this big inmate escape in which these guys, broke out of the vans. This is a complaint for one of the ladies who's charged in that. There were like 4 women arrested in the wake of that. So each time someone's arrested, the police basically write these documents, and they're usually 1 or 2 pages long. And what they're doing is they're explaining probable cause for why they're arresting someone, which they have to do for legal purposes. But it's great for us because it gives us a narrative as to what happened. If the police just said someone was stabbed, that's not that interesting unless you kind of get at why they were stabbed. And that's what these do. They provide a narrative as to why these people were doing what they did and that kind of thing. So I'll just pass these around. On the back, you'll see that there's a booking sheet, which is a document from the jail saying when they're booked into jail, they make this document. It has like their emergency contact on it. It has their mugshot. It has gang affiliations. It has distinctive tattoos in case they ever break out, as we saw just happened. The tattoos can become pretty important. One other thing to mention about booking sheets is the fact that they have a suspect's emergency contact on them is really important for us because when you're reporting a crime story, you need to consider every single side. So obviously the heart of the story is going to be what the police say, most likely, and then it's also going to be what the victims say about the crime. But it's equally important to reach out to the suspects. A lot of times the suspects don't have much of a voice. They're being accused and they're in jail. You can't really call them up. So every time there's one of these come up, we call the emergency contact on that sheet. And just ask the person. A lot of times the family member of the suspect doesn't want to talk. It's pretty embarrassing to have your loved one locked up on a felony. But you need to give them an opportunity to talk about it if they want and say something like, he's not that bad of a guy, or, he struggled with drug addiction. There's all kinds of reasons why people commit crimes. And just because they do doesn't mean they're, horrible people through and through. So it's important to remember that. So other ways we learn about stories, the police tweet a lot of stuff. If you're ever interested in following them, they do tweet a lot of promotional stuff too, which is kind of annoying. But they sometimes tweet shootings and SWAT situations and stuff like that. They also email us a lot. There is a designated PIO for the police department. They don't let you talk to individual officers. So a PIO is a spokesperson. It's short for Public Information Officer. It just means someone designated to talk to us. Oh yeah, police activity is often when they tweet something like police activity, it means like an officer-involved shooting. They kind of are purposefully a little vague when those happen at first. So you can usually tell something's up when they tweet something like that. So here's what you do. So once you've learned about a story either through the scanner or the other methods we talked about, Twitter or email or whatever, the first thing you want to do is go to the scene of the crime, which is a lot of fun. It's vital for gathering information. Then you're going to talk to witnesses who are around. You obviously have to talk to police at some point. And then you're going to try to find the people most affected by crime. And the last step is to gather records, which we've kind of already talked about. Okay, so going to the scene of a crime, these are the things that you can tell just by looking, just by being there. You'll already get all of this information. So often when it's a huge crime scene, they're going to lock down major roads. Like when all of Central is blocked off, you can usually know that it's a pretty big deal. How many officers are there? If there's like over 20 officers, it's a big thing. Even on most murders, there's only like usually 10 or something. You can look at what the police are focusing on. Oftentimes they're going in and out of a certain house, which could mean that the person was killed in there or found dead in there. Sometimes they'll have police officers who collect evidence, and you can see the evidence on the ground. So that's something that we always pay attention to, like bloody clothing on the ground or shell casings, anything like that. Any cars involved, sometimes there will be like a car in the middle of the crime scene with like its door open, clearly looks like it wasn't parked there purposefully, and then you can look carefully and see if there's any bullet holes in it. If there's anyone who's really emotional at a crime scene, this is kind of hard because you have to be respectful of people's privacy. I mean, something horrible just potentially happened to their family member. But if there is someone who's emotional, I always try to go talk to them. Usually they don't want to, but you have to at least try. Sometimes they do. I've gotten great stories from people just, talking about what's going on. The Office of the Medical Investigator is the agency that investigates all types of sudden deaths in the state. So if the OMI, as it's known, is there, you know that someone's dead. And then the last thing to look for are familiar faces. You guys probably know what the chief of police looks like and the mayor. If they're at the scene, you know that something really bad happened. They don't usually go to crime scenes. Most of what I just talked about you can report. I basically just call my editor and say, this is what's going on. There's these streets blocked off. There's these casings in the street. There's whatever is going on. The only thing you need to be careful about is making assumptions when you're out there. All you can report is what you can physically see with your eyes. You cannot decide that because someone is crying by the side of a crime scene, that doesn't mean that they are a family member. You can't report a family member was crying by the side of the crime scene because you don't know that. But you can say a woman was crying by the side of the crime scene without trying to intuit their relationship to the crime. Okay, so we touched on this, but I'll talk about it a little more. Talking to witnesses is really key because they're going to either back up or confirm what the police said, or they're going to say something kind of different. But a lot of times neighbors kind of just gather at crime scenes. If there's a crime in your neighborhood, you're usually pretty interested in what's going on. So whoever's at the scene, you should ask everyone who doesn't look like another reporter what they know. It doesn't matter what they look like or anything. Ask everyone, because you never know who's going to tell you stuff. Definitely knock on doors near the crime scene, because some neighbors don't come out or are trying to avoid the media. Yeah, this is a trick. If it's a really big scene and it's kind of an industrial area, you can try calling businesses that are inside the crime tape and see if they'll talk to you. That's worked a few times. Oh yeah, so the police will grab all the best witnesses and talk to them before you do, obviously. That's their job. But you can pay attention to who they're talking to and then try to talk to those people once they're done, because they usually have the best account of what happened. And again, we already talked about that, but talk to anyone who's could be related to the victim. So what can you report from witnesses? You can report most of what they say. The things I always ask them is, how many shots did you hear? Did you hear like screaming or yelling at any point during this thing? Ask if it's like a problem house. Did the police come there a lot? Ask them if someone was arrested. That's a really good thing, because usually they'll see if someone, usually they're there before you are, so they'll know if someone was taken into a police car. And witnesses can provide a lot more information than sometimes the police will. So this was a story we did about a year ago, I guess, in which an APD officer they were doing an undercover drug buy, and the narcotics lieutenant shot one of his own officers. Yeah, it was at a McDonald's. So I ran out there. Obviously, it was an all-day thing. This is a huge deal. The officer wasn't expected to live. It later turned out that he did, but. So if you'll just read the top of that, the entire top of the story is a witness account of what happened. So I got that just by walking. There was a motel that kind of overlooked the McDonald's parking lot. And so I just walked up to the motel and went to the balcony, which kind of overlooked where it had happened, and found this lady who had seen the whole thing. So that's probably the most fun, is when you get a witness who has actually seen a fair bit of the incident and that none of the other news stations have. It's just exhilarating. So of course, reporting from witnesses is secondhand. So if you've got something that doesn't match up with what other people are telling you at the scene, or it's not what police said, there's probably a problem. So the way to avoid that is to just be very careful, basically. But to a certain extent, you can't. You're basically trusting someone to tell you what they saw. You have to kind of trust their version of events. But things to definitely avoid are like hearsay. A lot of times when there's a crime in a neighborhood, all the neighbors are talking. They hear something from like their neighbor who's heard it from another neighbor. So you never want to report something that someone says they didn't see themselves. If they just say, my neighbor heard this, don't report that. Saying something like that guy is a drug dealer or he does lots of drugs, that happens all the time. People kind of think that certain neighbors of theirs do drugs, which I think all of us might have had that experience. But to actually go and report that, you can't do that. You don't know for sure that that guy on the corner who looks kind of sketchy is a drug dealer or does drugs, unless you've like literally seen them shoot up like multiple times. You should not call them a drug user. Again, if there's an account that's kind of off from the others, you should be pretty skeptical of it.
If the guy has 84 pounds of weed in his car, is it safe to assume he's a dealer?
Yeah. Then you can say he's a dealer because the police have said that. So you can say the police say that this guy's a dealer. So, yeah. But you can't say that from just like some neighbor saying, I think my neighbor grows pot or something. So I just heard on the scanner right there that they called for a chaplain, which likely means that someone is dead or there's something going on. Anyways. Okay, so we've talked a bit about talking to the police. It's kind of, it's not as exciting as talking to witnesses. But you have to do it. They're going to give you the nuts and bolts of what happened, who, what, when, where, why. You need to get what time, what took place, ask questions about what they're telling you, and get any names. They'll often release suspect names or a suspect description, like, hey, public, be aware of this guy. And they usually on big things will show up. The public information officers, the spokespeople will show up at the scene to talk to you. Okay, so reporting what the police say. They are the authority. They're the ones who are considered the most trustworthy. They're the ones showing up on scene. So you can report pretty much everything they tell you. The key thing there, though, is that you have to attribute to them. The job of the police is to accuse people of crimes. So you have to make it clear that this is an accusation. This does not mean that the person actually did this. The way that our judicial system works is that the police accuse people. They then go through the courts, which a trial eventually will determine whether they really did do it. But you can't convict them before they've had a trial. You have to make it clear that they have not been convicted of anything yet. And then the other thing is to be aware of what the police, everyone has biases. I do just as much as anyone else. And that goes for the police too. So they're gonna focus on certain things that you don't wanna just repeat wholesale. Examples of that might be like when there's an officer-involved shooting, they tend to talk about the guy they just killed, his like violent criminal history, if there is one. Which, they can talk about, but you have to understand that there's a bias. They want to make this guy look bad because they just killed him, So there's issues like that.
do you wind up talking to detectives? If a case is open, it usually goes to a detective, right?
Yeah, so we don't usually, they don't give us access to detectives or field officers or the people who are actually doing the police work. We always have to go through the spokespeople no matter what, because they're worried about what a normal officer might tell us, or they might mess up somehow, and I don't know. It's really frustrating though.
That's different from 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it used to be that reporters would just like have an office in the substation, and the cops would tell them everything. We have a reporter there who, at the Journal, who was doing crime at that time. But it's changed in part because the media has gotten more critical of the police. It used to be that the media and the police were pretty tight. Like we would report crimes, but we'd kind of pass a blind eye when the cops like beat someone up. But now that we're more critical, they're more cautious, I guess. So anytime I write a story, pretty much every sentence has to be attributed. And that includes using words like allegedly. So the key with allegedly is that just saying so-and-so allegedly shot someone else isn't enough protection. It's because the police are alleging something against that person. Yeah. So basically you have to use the term allegedly until the case is all the way through the courts. So you're going to be using the term allegedly for probably like 1.5 years or 2 years, because this guy hasn't been convicted. It's possible it was some other, it's highly doubtful, but it's possible some other random person got in through the window and stabbed them and somehow framed this guy who was found covered in blood outside. But we have to, he has the presumption of innocence just like anyone else. Once the jury decides guilty or not guilty, that's when you can stop using allegedly. So for example, in those inmate escapes recently, those were 2 guys who have been convicted of something. So in all of our stories, you'll see we just wrote, murderer Joseph Cruz, because he was convicted of murder. We're allowed to then say that he is a murderer. But that doesn't, usually, at least what I do is in the beginning stages where someone is just accused.
What other words do you use besides allegedly?
We use police say a lot. That's a really simple one. Allegedly is a little clunky. It's like kind of, I don't know, not ideal. We say so-and-so told police a lot. That works as attribution. And then also, of course, according to police or according to this spokeswoman or whatever. Oh yeah, so the only thing you need to be careful about in terms of using what victims tell you is, again, unfounded allegations. If they're just spouting off about, again, I guess drugs is just the easiest example, but people tend to accuse other people of being drug addicts. So if they have no real basis for knowing that the suspect is a drug addict, but they just go off and say, he's a drug addict and all kinds of things, and you can't report that. It's unfair to the person who's been accused. If they've been accused of murder, you can allow the victim's family to say, I can't believe he murdered my child. But you can't allow them to come up with something that he hasn't been accused of by the police. So you can't let them say, that he was using drugs if the police haven't said that themselves. I guess, we're reporting a lot of times stuff like people's lowest moments. So when they have to read about their crime on the internet, they can get pretty pissed off. So I would say it's properly attributing. If there's something in a story that isn't properly attributed, we're gonna get a call saying, what the fuck, you guys totally screwed up my whole life. And so that's really important, is getting that right. That's the main issue, is making sure that it's clear that it's not us as reporters saying this. We're, saying it via other people. Okay, so let's talk about, I guess I should wrap it up. Let's end on this. The actual writing of a story. So the way our team works is because, like I said, we're digital first, we're really fast. The point is to be running around and getting stuff online as soon as possible. That means that throughout the day, we're kind of building a story as it goes. So as soon as we hear something has happened, we have a post up on it immediately. And then slowly we build it up by talking, doing everything we talked about. Talking to witnesses, talking to family, getting court records, all that kind of thing. So the basic crime story is going to be like just a very basic structure. A shooting happened here, blah, 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 blah. Pretty simple lead. Then what we try to do is, as we're writing for the print product, which has, you have more time to do, it has a different deadline. You can take some more time with your writing and turn it into something that people might actually want to read, that kind of has some sort of narrative hook or pulls you in. Like a lot of those stories I showed you were not something that would ever go up really quickly. Those had been written through. So for those, you'll use like a more narrative style, similar to in those early slides when I talked about the difference between that basic sentence versus Edna Buchanan's version of that story. This is an example of a narratively written story. This is about the West Mesa murders, where 11 women were found dead, buried on the mesa in 2009. It's still unsolved. It's likely a serial killing. So this was an anniversary story. It's been 6 years, nothing's happened. How can we make this into a story? This is the way. We talked to some family members and kind of write this rather lengthy introduction into what we're talking about. She had a really strong interview, so it worked well for that kind of story. This is an example. This was a breaking news thing. This is one that's written pretty straight. So this is pretty simple. Law enforcement officers swarmed Northwest Albuquerque on Thursday night, going house to house with police dogs and flashlights during a manhunt for a convicted murderer and an alleged cop shooter who escaped the night before. That's pretty much what's going on, where is it, what time, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The alleged cop shooter one. You use that word.
Yeah.
So he's still on trial for
something? What happened is that charge against him was dropped.
Okay.
So you still have to use alleged because he wasn't convicted of it.
Okay.
So even though the trial, yeah, it's confusing. Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably not the greatest example.
Okay.
And then last but not least, this is how to write one kind of humorously.
Oh my God.
I mean, just the nature of the story. It's macabre, but it's slightly funny, you have to admit.
Who writes your headlines?
For online, we write them ourselves because we're going pretty quick. And then once things get written through for the print product, copy editors, who are the fact checkers of a story, will write the headline.
So you wrote that headline?
Yes, I did write that headline. Any last questions?
Do you have contact information?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe I can put it up somehow.
And she writes, you have 3 stories a week in the journal, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of crime here, and we're running around all the time, so pretty prolific.
So thanks a lot, Nicole.
Yeah, sure.